we're back at 50 and 50. A huge thanks to Netix for their support and helping me put together 50 for 50 vlogs in 50 days. 50 blogs as well, so there's quite a comprehensive blog as well underneath this video on lamb performance, and I'm focusing on 6 key health areas for lambs over the grazing season. And I suppose when we look at lambs, it's pretty obvious that we're in the business of weight gain. It's the inputs of into that system versus the output of weight gain being daily live weight gain. It's such an important tool. In beef or sheep farms, it's the most important tool of performance. And then we can look at our inputs that we can achieve that with. But you know, your target should be 250 to 300 grams a day. Some farmers are doing more than that, some are doing less, but it really is where your profit is. And I know, look, the basis of lamb performance is down to beginning with the ewe, that she's milky. A milky ewe will obviously be a better mother, and it's balancing the genetics of milkiness versus the meat potential of certain breeds, and then you have hybrid vigour. And then it's about maximising the lamb as it starts taking up grass, of dry matter intake, that grass particularly as the cheap available feed, and then supplementing lambs accordingly. So that's the basis of it. So we do start off with our ewe and our genetics and our body condition of our ewe being important. Her colostrum production, we talked about that in previous videos, and her ability to produce milk to rear her lambs. But then when we get out into pasture and we get out with lambs as we are now, there's a number of areas I think that are absolutely key to focusing on. And 6 of them here. Nimididaris is one. So Nimididaris is an unusual worm in the sense that the sheep or the lamb, the ewe will pass it out in her dung, or lamb will pass it out in her dung, and the egg will have the larvae developing in it. So most other worms have an egg that develops into larvae through the stages until that larvae is infective. What happens with Nimididaris, inside the egg, it has the infective larvae developing. So when you get hatching of these larvae, you get a mass hatching of larvae, or of the egg, mass hatching of larvae. And that's very temperature dependent, and we've absolutely, for most parts of the country, in Ireland and the UK, we've hit those temperature zones of a week of over 10 to 15 degrees. So we have mass hatching. So now we're at the risk of this roundworm. So the thing, and I'll talk about fecal egg counts in a little bit, Nimididaris gives you a little bit less time. Fecal egg counts aren't accurate because you could have these infective larvae causing problems. You mightn't have symptoms. So it's really about balancing the clinical symptoms, which can be dirty brown wet tails in lambs at this time of year, the weather conditions, and the risk that you've had Nimididaris before in your farm. If you have, that's when you time your white doses. Thankfully, we have no resistance to this parasite. Timing your white dose and taking that out as your first probably key risk on a lot of flocks will be at the moment looking at Nimididaris dosing, that parasite. Again, the thing with Nimididaris is it does coincide with another parasite, which is Coccidiosis. Now, Coccidiosis we typically associate with black dung, scouring, straining, but not always. This parasite can cause a lot of ill thrift and poor thrive in lambs, and we won't show a lot of clinical symptoms. So Coccidiosis is another one that we need to, the two of these can come together. Sometimes they can be both on a farm, or we're treating for Coccidiosis and it's Nimididaris, and vice versa. So I think when you do see these symptoms, it's no harm to be looking at dung sampling, just to, even if it is, you're pretty sure it's Nimididaris, take a dung sample, make sure there's no Coccidiosis. But for most flocks, what you will be doing is your white dose for Nimididaris, and probably will have given a treatment for Coccidiosis prior to this, or be considering it at the moment, because what happens with Coccidiosis is you'll see a lot of symptoms of this out at pasture, and it can creep up again. So people have got into routine prophylaxis here with coccidial agents. Now, what I'll say is that's fine, but just again to reduce your risk of coccidiosis, particularly if you're starting creep feeding lambs or around water drinkers, we want to minimise dirty areas where lambs are congregating, and you can have a build of coccidial eggs here. So that's just one other thing. But these two need to be managed. A lot of farms will manage this by worm dosing and a coccidial dose. Just be mindful of how many coccidial prophylactic doses you're using in a season, that you should be getting down to timing to one, that lambs are developing resistance. If you're not, issues with coccidiosis, fantastic, but that's where most flocks will be. And these are the two early ones for me that will cause problems. The next one is a non-negotiable vaccine, I think, in all our flocks, and that's Clostridial disease. So Clostridial diseases are spore-based bacteria. They're in soil, they're on every farm. They can cause things from lamb dysentery here to black leg to tetanus. There's a braxy, pulpy kidney. There's a huge number of them. And I think with Clostridial diseases in lambs, I think it's something we vaccinate against because you don't have time. We often find these lambs dead. And it's still a big killer of lambs. And what you need to be thinking for a Clostridial disease control program is really looking at vaccinating the ewes. So you have cover for in colostrum for your lambs, and then they need 2 shots 3 to 4 weeks apart. Typically what I'd be saying is the 10-in-1 because it contains Chevoy, Clostridium Chevoy, and I think that's just a building block again of good lamb health performance. Some farms will bring in pneumonia vaccine into this, and again that's how it complicates your vaccine program. But we must remember this Pasteurella vaccine is important because Pasteurella in lambs is actually in the back of their tonsils. And what happens is if we get stressors at all, they can trigger this and we can get outbreaks of pneumonia. So if you've had issues with pneumonia in lambs before, this is top of your list. A lot of flocks again are using Clostridial and pneumonia vaccines to the ewes and then repeating these on lambs, a bit like the Clostridial vaccines. So there's different combinations you need to talk to your vet, but for me, Clostridial is absolutely fundamental, and then certain farms really should be considering pneumonia. And it's typically what I've seen with pneumonia in lambs is it can be younger and older lambs. They tend to barely have no shocks or stressors during the grazing season. It's typically later on in the season. Okay, so there are the 3. The big one when it comes from an animal health perspective on flocks, of course, is worms. Round worms in our lambs is a huge issue. And the biggest driver issue, this is anthelmintic resistance. So the worms are smart. Over thousands of years they've developed and they've survived, and what they're doing, they have an ability to survive. They're becoming resistant to our worm drenches. So we typically have white benzimidazoles, yellow levamisoles, and clear ivermectin drenches. So what we're seeing is resistance to a load of these. So we have worms on farms and we have drenches that are working poorly or not at all in some cases. Now we have 2 other drenches on the market, which is an orange drench and a purple drench, which is a combination. Now these need to be spared and used correctly, but worms are an issue in our flock. So what we need to do is, we certainly can't just dose our way out of a worm problem. We need to step back and say, what can we do to time our doses a little bit better, rotating our doses year to year, and minimizing down unnecessary dosing. So for me, early on, fecal egg counts in a lamb performance flock health plan work well. As the season gets longer, it's been argued that fecal egg counts are less accurate, but certainly in young lambs, after 6 weeks, should you be doing pooled fecal egg samples? I think some people assess every week, 2 weeks, at a minimum every 3 weeks, to see where fecal egg count levels are and react accordingly with a dose. What we're then doing is pushing our dosing out to longer intervals. We're using different doses each year, so we're slowing down resistance. Now that on its own won't be enough. You need to look at grazing management as well, looking at where pastures are, what's your routine around building up some susceptible worms, like so dosing and moving to clean pasture. We shouldn't be doing that. We're trying to build this in refugia, and I'm going to go into worms again in more detail on its own. But I suppose for me, worm management in our flock is really important. If you look at some of the exciting work, what I think is exciting is mixed species swards on for lambs. They take a bit more management than your typical ryegrasses, but they're on the parasite front. They contain tannins which maybe help with the or definitely affect parasitic growth in the gut. And the other thing is that because of their coil shape and their different structures, they may be harder for the larvae to get up and ingest it. So there's some very positive stuff coming out on that on worms. So we need to look at our worm control program, fecal egg counts early, grazing management, and then strategic dosing and how you do that. Number 5 for me is scald. If we look at another problem that can affect flocks and lambs over the summer months, is scald. So it's Dichelobacter in between the feet, that reddening. Lambs can get quite lame. I was researching this morning and I had read somewhere, and it made sense that if you look at 300 grams per day, that one lame foot is 50 grams of weight of loss of daily live weight gain a day. And again, because the lamb's been painful, they're less focused on eating. So you can imagine if you have 2 lame feet, what kind of effects you can have there. Scald works well in the sense that if we diagnose it early, foot bathing works really well with lambs. Now you have the challenge if you have lambs out of grazing, getting them in. But if you're doing any routine procedures here, I would say running lambs through a foot bath is very important, because scald responds well to foot bathing. Just the key thing is, and anyone who's put lambs through foot baths, they're not inclined to stand in them for too long. Have them the right size, get lambs used to them. And again, this is where batch foot bathing works well, where you get a group of lambs into a foot bath, stand them in it for a couple of minutes. You get much better, penetration and much better effect from the bathing. So that's scald. That's number 5. Number 6, the final one for lambs, is minerals. So we see as lambs come off milk. And in fairness, lambs can have issues with minerals even when they're younger if ewes have mineral deficiencies, because the milk is obviously going to have issues. But typically when we see lambs starting to graze at 6 to 8 weeks, we've the beginning and they're starting to kick on and grow. In this next phase, you're going to see issues with minerals. And the big one, as most sheep farmers will know, is cobalt. Cobalt and B12 are completely linked together. We need cobalt in the rumen for B12 to be generated, and B12 plays a key role in the metabolism of the young lamb, glucogenesis, getting that liver function. So, and why sheep are thought to have more issues is that B12 is involved in wool growth. So particularly any young growing ruminant, cobalt's important, but for lambs it's particularly important. So most flocks, and you'll see my notes below, most flocks respond extremely well to cobalt supplementation and B12 supplementation as well throughout the season. There is other minerals that can cause issues, whether it be copper, selenium and iodine would be typically the ones that I would see. People will talk about zinc as well, but they're the big ones. Again, what's your farm like? Have you some grazing analysis here on minerals to see what are the mineral levels like in your forages, and then you can look at how you can supplement. But I think it's a for most flocks now, they'll supplement with cobalt and B12 coming into this stage at 8 to 10 weeks, particularly in young growing lambs. You'll see loose fleece, you'll see poor thrive, and it's another big one with lambs. So they're the 6 key things. I know it's a long one today. Nematodes, coccidiosis now, Pasteurella vaccines certainly at a minimum. Consider pneumonia vaccines. Have a plan for worms. I'm going to come back to worms again before this 50 and 50 is over. Get your lameness control plan in place. You've heard me talk about lameness and foot bleeding and scald before. And then minerals here, remembering that there's lots of minerals that can affect lamb performance, but cobalt and B12 are big ones. Okay, so that's it. That's lamb performance, 6 areas of focus for me. And I think if you hit those 6 areas along with a good solid base and feeding and genetics, you'll hit these targets quite easily of 250 to 300 grams a day. Thought for today, I'm getting lazy, I should have these thought out. But I suppose what I'm applying here was a conversation I had this morning on a Zoom call with a group of farmers, and it was about science. I suppose for me, I've got to look at science. This is what I'm trying to do, applying science the best way we can, most efficiently as we can. We've got to balance the textbooks with the realities of the farm, but science really has got us to where we are. If you look at the advancements in science throughout history, and it's interesting now with all these theories on coronavirus and everything, I think when it comes to vaccine development, when it comes to where we are, we've got to utilise science. And that's my thought for today. Happy safe farming, everybody.